That simple instruction, spoken quietly over the sound of distant alarms and hurried footsteps, anchors a new set of images released by Britain's Ministry of Defence. Raw, ground-level footage that offers an unnervingly intimate view of life on the front lines of a widening confrontation in the Middle East. The clips, released in recent days, show soldiers at close quarters as what the ministry describes as an incoming ballistic missile threat unfolds. In one scene, troops shelter in a concrete mine compound, and a voice, calm but taut, tells them, "Get ready to brace." Moments later, a distant concussion is heard, and voices register the thin human shock of being near an impact. The footage is grainy, immediate, and stubbornly ordinary. Boots on concrete, helmets being adjusted, the rhythm of breaths and rapid radio calls as people who are trained for this find themselves nonetheless momentarily raw and vulnerable. The Ministry of Defence framed the material as a demonstration of the risk British personnel face while deployed across the region. In messaging that accompanied the footage, it said those on the ground were members of Royal Air Force counter-unmanned aerial system teams and that they have been actively shooting down drone threats using lightweight multi-role missiles across the Middle East, working around the clock to protect our partners and allies in the region. That attribution is how the ministry described the missions. The images aim to show both execution and consequence, the tension of detection, the split-second decisions, and the relief and exhaustion that follow. Another video, again attributed to RF units, reportedly shows an engagement in which personnel employed so-called lightweight interceptors against an aerial threat. The brief exchange of commands, the flash of a launch, and then an immediate assessment of whether the threat has been neutralized. A Royal Air Force specialist appearing in short C. Lips released by the ministry described the tempo in stark terms. Relentless work around the clock to detect and shoot down aerial drone threats to protect our allies. Taken together, the trio of releases is both operational and political. They remind a wider public that the United Kingdom maintains a significant military posture in what the British government terms West Asia, a presence centered around bases and facilities in Bahrain, Oman, Cyprus, and the United Arab Emirates. They also telegraph a clear message. British forces are active in the region, executing hard-edged defensive tasks, while the government in London is navigating a very different course from some of its closest partners. At the heart of that diplomatic divergence lies a dispute over means and objectives. London has publicly declined to join a US-led push for a full-scale blockade of Iranian ports. Instead, the British position, as reflected in statements from ministers and officials, has been to support efforts to reopen and secure the Strait of Hormuz through diplomatic channels and international cooperation. To many in Whitehall, the calculus is precise. The strait is crucial to global trade and energy supplies. And while Britain will defend maritime security, it has been wary of being drawn into a campaign framed in exclusively unilateral or militarized terms. That stance has not gone unnoticed in Washington. President Donald Trump has, on multiple occasions, criticized the British approach and pointedly the Prime Minister. In an unvarnished rebuke delivered publicly, he said the problem with NATO is we'll always be there for them, but they'll never be there for us. And when I hear the UK, which was sort of considered the Rolls-Royce of allies, right? Wouldn't you say they were the oldest? And they were going to be there, and I say it would be really helpful if you'd send over a couple of ships, and if you have some minesweepers, which they do be very helpful, and the Prime Mini. Sturr is a nice man. I think he's a very nice guy. He says, well, I'd like to ask my team. I said, you don't have to worry about a team. You don't have a team. You're the Prime Minister. You can make a decision. Those words are blunt. And they cut to the core of a long-standing tension in transatlantic relations. Allies who share values and history can at times diverge sharply on tactics and priorities. In public and in private, Washington has pushed for demonstrations of collective resolve. London has at times chosen a more measured course that prioritizes diplomatic avenues even as it continues to protect forces and facilities in harm's way. The videos from the Ministry of Defence therefore perform a dual political function. They show that British forces are engaged and that they are operating in harm's way. They also underscore that London's operational footprint, shooting down drones, guarding bases, strengthening early warning networks, does not necessarily translate into alignment. With every strategic posture proposed by Washington, the visual record answers one question: Britain is present and active. It does not answer another, whether presence equals participation in the same political campaign. Behind these strategic debates, the human reality remains stark. The footage isolates the micro moments that punctuate deployment: a soldier's hand steadying a radio mic, eyes tracking a sky that could deliver either nothing or catastrophe, a shared exchange of terse words meant to steady nerves. The ministry's short clips are not cinematic. They are documentary in the most literal sense, designed to show work as it happens, not to stage heroics for the camera. The language that accompanies the videos, phrases like working around the clock and protect our partners and allies, intentionally frames the narrative as a protective, defensive effort rather than offensive escalation. And yet, for audiences at home and for allies abroad, such images inevitably become part of a larger conversation about purpose and limits. If Britain is shooting down drones and preparing for ballistic missile threats, what exactly does that mean for the risk calculus in the region? How do defensive operations sit alongside a refusal to participate in certain offensive measures? For many diplomats, commanders, and foreign policy analysts, the answer is not a contradiction but a balancing act, maintaining credible defense while insisting that broader political objectives be pursued through multilateral diplomacy. Those are precisely the themes threaded through a recent speech in which the Prime Minister sought to explain London's position and to affirm the historical ties that bind Britain to the United States. Speaking in Washington, the Prime Minister evoked shared history and mutual sacrifice, referencing the founding years of the American Republic, common cultural ties, and the web of alliances that have endured for decades. The speech, at times ceremonious and rich in historical allusion, stressed that the relationship is an unbreakable bond of history and heritage, culture and commerce, industry and invention, and that both nations have stood together through the best and worst of times. Such rhetoric is meant to reassure partners that the divergence on tactics does not equal estrangement. It was also a reminder that diplomacy is often conducted in two registers: the immediate kinetic measures taken to protect people and installations, and the deeper strategic commitments to shared institutions and norms. In that sense, London's strategy has been to keep both registers alive, to defend where necessary, but to leave the door open for multilateral rules-based solutions to the larger crisis. The Prime Minister's public remarks also struck a carefully conciliatory tone toward the White House. He praised hospitality extended to him and his wife, expressed gratitude for generous hospitality during his visit, and paid tribute to the capacity of the host country to recover from unexpected incidents by keeping calm. The language was classic diplomacy, warm, historical, and focused on common purpose. In moments like that, the speech aimed to remind audiences that the relationship is robust enough to weather policy disagreements. The backdrop to all this is a dangerous and fluid security environment. The kinds of threats British forces say they are defending against, swarms of unmanned aerial systems, guided rockets, cruise and ballistic missiles, are precisely the threats that have reshaped military planning across the region. Governments are investing in detection networks, interceptor missiles that are smaller and faster to deploy, and new rules of engagement intended to protect bases, ships, and critical infrastructure. These technological and operational responses are part of a larger mosaic that includes sanctions, diplomacy, and in some forums, the threat of force as a bargaining chip for ordinary citizen. The conflicts back home, the images are both distant and visceral. They translate abstract debates about sanctions and strategy into human terms, soldiers and bases that, until recently, may have felt remote and removed from the headlines. For families of service members, for military planners, and for policymakers, the question at hand is practical and immediate. How best to keep those personnel safe while supporting a foreign policy strategy that serves national interests without carelessly expanding conflict? There is also a public diplomacy element. Releasing raw footage accomplishes three things at once. It signals operational credibility to allies and adversaries, it humanizes the troops for domestic audiences, and it shakes the narrative about how the government is protecting national and allied interests. Governments have long used carefully curated images to do this. What is notable here is the choice to show unembellished, gritty moments, a decision that invites empathy but also invites scrutiny. President Trump's public rebukes of London underscore why that scrutiny matters. An ally's refusal to endorse a blockade or to join an escalatory strategy becomes, in the president's account, a test of allied solidarity. For the British government, by contrast, the calculus includes economic considerations, the risk of escalation, and the desire to sustain a coalition that has broad international legitimacy. Those are not merely political hair-splitting, they are competing prescriptions for how to manage a conflict whose consequences would ripple well beyond the region. In the weeks ahead, expect more imagery, more briefings, and more political theatre. Expect, too, that each photograph, video clip, and quote will be interpreted not just for what it depicts, but for what it signals: commitment, restraint, resolve, or ambivalence. For journalists and citizens alike, the job is to pass those signals carefully to separate immediate operational realities from strategic choices and to hold decision makers accountable for both. Temporarily, at least, the Ministry of Defence footage serves that purpose well. It shows the stakes in a way that policy papers and press statements cannot. It shows people doing a tense, dangerous job. It shows a government that, while seeking diplomatic solutions, is simultaneously investing in the capacity to protect its forces and partners. Whether that balance succeeds in preventing wider escalation depends on a mix of skillful diplomacy, credible deterrence, and crucially, an accurate appraisal of risk on all sides. As the region simmers and as leaders trade public barbs and private warnings, the images from the bases, voices telling one another to breathe, to brace, to carry on, are a stark reminder that the consequences of great power politics often register first at ground level. The Allies may debate the best path forward, and the public may judge their leaders in parliaments and congresses, but in the moments, capture. On those films, the choices are immediate: detect, decide, and act, and then live or mourn with the knowledge that the next decision may come even sooner. Those are the human and strategic stakes the footage lays bare. The cameras caught a handful of seconds in time. The policies that will follow will shape years. In the end, the question facing governments and publics is this: can the world find ways to temper confrontation while protecting the people who stand in harm's way? The answer will be written in diplomacy, in deployments, and at times in the unfiltered breaths of those who hold the line.